Dallas-Fort Worth. This is North Texas in Focus. This show takes a closer look at issues and concerns around the Metroplex. We bring you the show on 88.1 Indy and 881indy.com.
Hi, I'm Matthew Reyna. This is North Texas in Focus. My guest on the program today is Dallas area Congressman Colin Allred. Congressman Allred has represented Texas's 32nd Congressional District in the United States Congress since first being elected in 2018. He is currently running for re-election against Republican Antonio Suad. Congressman Allred isn't your typical elected official. Before running for office, he was an all-Big 12 linebacker at Baylor and went on to play parts of 4 seasons in the NFL with the Tennessee Titans. His career in public service started when he joined the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration. At HUD, he worked under then-Secretary Julian Castro, who was the former mayor of my hometown and the greatest city in the world, San Antonio, Texas. Congressman Allred's public profile has grown in recent months. He made headlines last week when, as a Democrat, he was endorsed by the right-leaning U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And as one of the earliest endorsers of then-candidate Biden, he was front and center when the president visited Fort Worth earlier this year. I spoke to the congressman on Friday morning, and our discussion included an early read of President Biden's standing among modern presidents, how the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is impacting North Texas, and missed opportunities in the current Congress. I started our discussion by asking the congressman to break down the impact of President Biden's executive order to pardon those charged with marijuana possession at the federal level.
Well, listen, I think it has a lot of different components that make it the right thing to do. I think, from an equity perspective, too often the way laws around minor marijuana possession have been enforced has fallen the hardest on Black and brown communities. I think it also recognizes that there are many states in the country that have legalized marijuana, and so I think in many ways it's bringing the federal government in line with what's happening around the country. So I think it was certainly the right thing to do, and the pardoning of folks with these past minor possession charges, although most of that is done at the state level. If you have a federal conviction for that is going to help change lives. That's going to help folks move forward with their lives after, in a way that I think is going to have a real impact.
This is the second pretty major initiative President Biden's done through at the executive level, after student loans, now marijuana. So I would just ask you to finish this sentence for me. Joe Biden is the best president since blank.
Well, listen, I think he's a great president, and I endorse President Biden and campaigned for him. I think we've had an incredibly productive first 2 years, from the American Rescue Plan to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, to the CHIPS Act, to the Inflation Reduction Act, to the PACT Act, which expanded benefits for veterans. Each one of these has historic components that I think stack up with really any modern presidency. And in terms of legislative accomplishments, you'd probably have to go back to LBJ's first term to find anything similar on the Democratic side. So I think he's had an incredibly productive first 2 years working with the Congress. And then, of course, as you said, he's taken some actions through executive actions that I think are very bold and forward-looking, and I think were the right thing to do.
And you mentioned all those pieces of legislation that worked through the Congress. And in my opinion, this has probably been the most productive Congress in my lifetime. I'm about 29 years old. So why are Republicans favored to take the House back?
Well, listen, I don't know that I accept that they are favored. I know that that's where what the prognosticators are, but in American politics, the pendulum sometimes swings back and forth depending on how and what happened in the previous election. I understand that. But what I think is certainly true is that Democrats have taken steps to lower costs for families across the country. We have done things that have not been done in decades. We've passed the first gun violence prevention bill in 30 years. We've passed the largest investment in our infrastructure since the Eisenhower era. We have allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices, the biggest climate investment in our history, reducing our emissions by 40% by 2035. All of these things are accomplishments that we can run on and have to make sure people know about. because I have seen that some of the legislation that we've passed is so big and so sweeping in some ways that sometimes folks don't know some of the benefits that came out of it. For example, if you're going to get your vaccine booster for COVID vaccine booster, and you walk into your CVS or your Walgreens and you get that shot and you walk out and you don't pay anything, that's thanks to the American Rescue Plan that Democrats and President Biden passed. There's going to be projects you're going to see being built in your community. You're going to see electric vehicle charging stations being built around your community. That's thanks to the infrastructure bill that we passed. And it's just going to continue these things that are going to impact folks' lives. And I think we have to make sure people know what we've done, and also the radical direction that Republicans want to take us in, which is one that wants to ban abortion nationwide. And I think wants to roll back a lot of the things that we've already discussed in this interview.
Mm. Well, the Washington Post did an article yesterday where they said 299 of the Republican House nominees believe that the last election was stolen. So, I mean, not only is there the chance of Democrats losing the House, but, losing the House to people that believe some pretty extreme things. So how fragile would you say our democracy is at this moment?
Well, I want to kind of separate it into two parts. I think that it's become part of the Republican Party's platform to claim that the last election was stolen and to pass voter suppression laws based on that, even though they know it's not true. And I know that because we've seen interviews with, for example, Bill Barr, President Trump's Attorney General. The January 6th committee showed everybody where he is doing an interview, and he says he told the president that it was all lies, that it was all BS, and that these claims about the election being stolen were not true. So President Trump knew at the time, and certainly I think many of my colleagues and the folks running around the country know that it's not true. And so it's incredibly fragile from that perspective. And then in terms of how many House Republicans, even after January 6th happened, voted not to certify that presidential election, and how many are saying going forward that they have these questions. But I don't think it's fragile in the eyes of the American people or in the eyes of North Texans. When I talk to most folks, they still believe incredibly strongly in our democracy, and they want to protect it. And they know that sometimes their candidate might not win, but they don't think that means we should get rid of the democracy. And so I do think there's a divide between where Republican politicians are and where our people are. And I have more faith in our people. And I don't think that American democracy is going anywhere. I think it's going to win out, as it always has. But these things don't happen on their own. We have to have folks protect it every day in your own lives, and also support candidates who will protect our democracy. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a Democrat. I've been saying for some time the biggest divide in our politics right now is not between Democrats and Republicans. It's between folks who believe in our democracy and folks who don't.
Mm-hmm. And if those people that don't are elected, and say in 24, if we had a second Trump term, you believe that our democracy would win out, as you said?
Well, first of all, I think there's a lot that goes into that in terms of predictions, and I don't. That's difficult to see and where things are going to land and who's going to be elected in future elections and things like that. What I just mean is that I think that the American people understand implicitly. We all grew up with this idea that our democracy is what makes us special. Every American knows, the stories, sort of, how we separated from the British, how we formed this democracy, how we're the oldest and most important democracy in the world. It's our founding documents are kind of written in all of our DNA. And I just think that, for the vast majority of Americans, they don't want to see anything done to undermine that. There's the kind of partisan fighting of the day. There's, leaders who will come and go, but I don't think that the American people are going to lose faith in democracy. And ultimately, I think that's going to result in election results that reflect that. We saw that in the last election. Beating an incumbent president is extremely difficult, but we had the largest turnout in American history during a pandemic, when folks had to risk their lives to go vote. And Joe Biden got the most votes of any candidate ever for president, and ended up winning by, I think, 7 million more votes than the sitting president. So I think there was a rejection there too. And so I just, I can have my faith in folks' belief in our country and in our shared values. And I recognize this is an extremely dangerous time, and I'm not saying that it's not. But I think ultimately we are going to land on the right path, because I think that's just who we are.
What do you think turnout will look like this year, both here in North Texas and across the country?
I think it's going to be very high, and I think we've just seen that in recent elections, and I think that's a good thing. We have been historically, unfortunately, I was a voting rights lawyer before I came to Congress. We've been historically one of the lowest, in terms of voter percentage turnouts of any of the developed nations in the world, any developed democracies. We've always, had some of the lowest turnout numbers, but we've seen, increasingly, folks come out not only in presidential elections but in midterms, and we of course have had some enormous events, particularly here in Texas. From the overturning of Roe v. Wade to where we're now in a scenario where abortion is illegal in the state of Texas, where if a woman is raped in the state of Texas and someone provides her with an abortion, that they are committing a felony, or if they are the victim of incest, that if they're able to help them terminate that pregnancy, that you are committing a felony. That's now the case. That's the law right now in the state of Texas. That's motivating to people because they know that's not who we are, and they know it's not right. And for 50 years, this has been an established right that people have come to rely on. And of course, we've had things like the tragedy in Uvalde, where kids were killed, sitting in their classrooms, and where we've had to hear these stories of parents having to identify their children based on the shoes that they were wearing or the backpacks that they took to school. And I think these enormous events are going to continue to make folks realize that who you vote for has a direct impact on your life and on events like this. And it's important that you come out and make your voice heard. That not necessarily means that it's going to be, everyone's going to come out and vote for Democrats. When I was a voting rights lawyer, I never asked anybody who they were going to vote for. I just wanted to help them vote. But I do think that it's important that we have higher turnout, because unfortunately in Texas, for most of the last 20 or 30 years, we've been in the bottom 10 states or even the bottom 5 in terms of voter turnout. And there's some reasons for that, in terms of our laws making it difficult to vote. But it's also just true that we haven't always had the most interest in our elections.
Mm-hmm. One of the most direct ways that you as an elected official, especially at the federal level, have an impact on your constituents' lives is through infrastructure. Of course, multiple Congresses have tried and failed to get the infrastructure bill that y'all got done. So just tell me, what will the bipartisan infrastructure law mean for DFW? I mean, if everything is implemented right and the money goes to the right places, what is that going to do for the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I know it's not the topic that everybody gets everybody excited, but it is the topic maybe that in some ways impacts your daily life the most. You're going to get up, get in your car, and drive to work, drive to school, drive to the doctor's office, whatever it may be, and along that route, you're going to be interacting with our infrastructure. You're going to turn on a light switch, and you're going to hope that it comes on. You're going to turn your water faucet and hope that there's water there. You're going to want to have access to high-speed internet. All of these things are funded, through our tax dollars and through our investments in our infrastructure. And we have to make sure that we're investing not in the infrastructure of the past, but in the infrastructure of the future. And that's what I think I want to see us make sure we do with the resources that we passed in the bipartisan infrastructure bill in Congress. So Texas is going to get $35 billion over the next 5 years. And that's a lot of money. We're going to basically, I think, as much or more than really any state when it's all said and done. And $8 billion of that funding has already been announced, including $5.2 billion in highway funding, $408 million for building out an electric vehicle charging network around the state, $508 million for clean and safe water, $645 million for public transit, which that's $172 million of that is coming to North Texas alone. So, if you're looking at DART or the light rail, or that's going to get a lot of investments. We've gotten $345 million for our airports, over $80 million just for DFW and Love Field alone. So our airports are getting some serious investments. And so you should see projects starting to take place in your community, whether that's highway repairs, or which we have thousands of miles of highways that are in disrepair in Texas, or bridges being repaired. We have I think over 800 bridges that need to be repaired, or as I said, these electric vehicle charging stations that you're going to see here in the state, where right now the state has announced a plan where every 50 miles we're going to have an electric vehicle charging station. So sort of the range anxiety that some folks might have around having an electric vehicle should be dealt with through that. And I think it's for us, it's not really optional in North Texas. And we added over 1 million people to our area in the last decade, and we're going to add 1 million more in the next decade. So for us, if we don't plan for this growth and deal with this growth, then we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we don't have enough water, or we're stuck in traffic, where we don't have enough electricity for everybody, where not everyone can have access to high-speed internet, where our economy is going to be weighed down by not having these smart investments. So at the federal level, we can create these programs and these pools of money, and now we need our local leaders to implement them in a way that is forward-looking and that helps our economy grow into what it will be, and not just what it has been.
So you're coming to the end of your second term, doing some research for this interview. I could see you're getting high marks with all the right people, so to speak, endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce, being sent on presidential delegations. I wonder if you have any aspirations for office higher than Congress.
Well, I'm really proud to have both been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and most of our major labor unions. And I think that's pretty uncommon. To be able to both be incredibly pro-worker, which I'm a proud union member, former union member myself from the NFL Players Association, and also being very pro-business, understanding that we need our business community to do well in order to employ those workers. And I think that's a balance that haven't always seen being struck. But for me, this is my home. I was born and raised in Dallas, and I was raised here by a single mother who taught in DISD schools. And when I decided to run for Congress in 2018, everybody thought I was crazy because my opponent had not even had a Democratic opponent in the 2016 election. He had been so entrenched. He was a 22-year incumbent. But I wasn't just picking a seat that I thought I could win. I was picking a seat that meant something to me, and that was my home and my community. And I'm really proud of the campaign that we ran in that election to get elected, and then being reelected, and I hope to continue to serve. And I've always said that I want to serve this community in Texas and the country as best as I can. And so I'll just continue to look for ways to do that, whether that's providing leadership in my current position or anything else. I think I want to make sure that we keep moving forward, because when you're raised by a single parent, I think you have a little different understanding in some ways of the role that some of these critical institutions can play. And I know I wouldn't have played in the NFL or become a civil rights lawyer or worked for President Obama if it weren't for this community. I want to keep representing it any way I can.
Mm. Let me end with this, and this one's going to be a little long-winded, so bear with me here.
Sure.
On Saturday, all of my friends, all of my best friends over the years, had a birthday party for another friend, and I wasn't invited. And I've been thinking about it all week. It's been one of those things that's irked me all week. It's been a big week. I'm interviewing a congressman today, but I've been thinking about that all week. And I wonder for you, in the group you came into Congress with, the so-called majority makers, as Speaker Pelosi called y'all, as y'all come to kind of a crossroads where maybe you'll be in the majority, maybe you won't be after the election. Is there, out of everything you've got done, is there one thing that irks you, one missed birthday party, so to speak, that you think of that you wish we got this one done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of what we have done. And I think there is a tendency, particularly among Democrats, when we pass incredible legislation that does things that we've said we wanted to do for 30 and 40 years, that we oftentimes talk more about the things we wish we had done than what we did do. But there's two things that I have pushed hard for that we still have not gotten across the line. And one of them is paid leave for everybody. It's, to me, ridiculous that we're the only developed major country in the world that doesn't have a national paid leave policy. And I actually, my wife and I had our first child in 2019, a month into my time in Congress, which is not the best timing in the world. But I took paternity leave, and I was actually the first member of Congress to ever take paternity leave. And then when we had our second child in last year, I also took paternity leave, and got a lot of coverage because it's NFL linebacker taking paternity leave, and all of that. But to me, it shouldn't be that strange, and it should be available to everyone. And everyone in their life is going to have something come up where they need time off. When I was in the NFL, we used to say we had a 100% injury rate, meaning at some point you will get injured. And it's not about if, it's you will. That's the same thing in life. At some point you'll need some time off from work, whether that's because you're having a child, or maybe you have a sick family member, or maybe you yourself get sick or just need some time off. And you shouldn't have to lose your job if that happens. But for too many folks, that is the case. And it's to me, it's just not right. So I think we got very close to having that included in some of the bills we passed. We just didn't have enough votes in the Senate for it. And I'm going to keep fighting for that because I think the American people, and I think Texans, understand that, especially after the pandemic, that we need to do that. And the second thing, really quickly, is voting rights. The right to vote is the foundation of our democracy, and our democracy is the foundation of all of our prosperity, whether it's our economy or whether it's the way the world looks at us, or just your own rights and your own ability to protect yourself, and get involved in coalitions and come out in an election and say, I want to vote for the right to be who I am, without discrimination. All of that is based on our democracy. And as a voting rights lawyer, I can tell you that for years before this kind of recent period, there was already a sustained attack on the right to vote, particularly on young people, people of color, to try and find ways to make it more difficult for those communities to vote. And some of them were more egregious than others, but they all add up. And it ends up leading to us having, folks who want to be involved in an election, not knowing how to, or feeling like it's just too difficult to. And if you feel that way, that's intentional. It's intentional that you might not know whether or not you're registered to vote, or whether or not you're where to go vote, or whether you need to go vote. That's intentional. It shouldn't be that difficult. And we should protect the right to vote and make it as easy and as accessible, and yes, as reliable as possible. And, the state of Texas in the last legislative session passed a voter suppression bill to make it even more difficult for folks to vote. They made it much more difficult to vote by mail, which particularly impacts students. And we saw in the primary election, we had a 12.5% rejection rate of mail-in ballots. And you might say, well, what is it? That doesn't sound like that much, Colin. Well, yes, it is. In the election before that, we had a 1% rejection rate. So to have 12.5% of the mail-in ballots rejected because they didn't comply with the change that the state made to the law means that's thousands of Texas voters who thought they voted, but then their vote wasn't counted. And that's not right. And I've tried very, very hard to pass voting legislation in the Congress, and we've been able to get it through the House. We just have not been able to get it through the Senate with the filibuster that they have there, which means we need 60 votes. And we just haven't had 10 Republicans who would join us in protecting the right to vote. To me, it's not a partisan thing. And I know that as I'm an elected official, I'm a Democrat, I don't see voting rights as a partisan issue because I don't know who you're going to vote for. I just think you should be able to vote. And I think it's kind of, we're seeing that, who people vote for is changing rapidly. What communities are voting which way could change depending on, a couple of elections. So you have to be careful just casting a broad net and saying, well, these folks vote for Democrats, so we should make it harder for them to vote. That's not necessarily true. And I just think it's very un-American. I think it's really anti-democratic. And I think it's part of sort of an overall undermining of our democracy that we have to be really, really careful about. Like I said, I still believe in the American people, even with all these laws being passed in the last election. A record number of folks came out. but they're having to overcome things they shouldn't have to overcome. And I want to see us change that. So I regret that we haven't been able to get that done. I think we will get it done if we can get a couple more seats in the Senate. But that's all based on the results of what's coming up. And I think, as I said, I would like to see us have some of my Republican colleagues join us in protecting the right to vote. But unfortunately, that just hasn't been the case.
Well, Congressman Allred, thank you for joining us today on North Texas in Focus.
You're listening to North Texas in Focus on 88.1 Indy or 881indy.com. If you have something you'd like to hear addressed on a future show or any questions, you can send email to info@881indy.com. That's info@881indy.com.
I would like to thank today's guest, Congressman Colin Allred. I would also like to thank Sarah and his press office for organizing the interview. If you haven't already registered to vote, here's your friendly reminder that Tuesday, October 11th is the last day to do so. For KNTU's North Texas in Focus, I'm Matthew Reyna.
This has been North Texas in Focus on 88.1 Indy and 881indy.com. If you have questions or information to share with us, you can send email to info@881indy.com. Thanks for listening.